All right. So this was just a fun game at our favourite bar, E4, E5, at Huelo Bar, Newtown. Playing a bit of chess with Mrs. Chess Noob, who of course is a beginner. Just a bit of fun. Mrs. Chess Noob plays a Vienna, very interesting. Let's move into Forkbeer. I didn't really think Mrs. Chess Noob knew how to play the Vienna. But let's see what happens. She's seen me play the Vienna a few times before. I thought she was probably going to maybe transform this back to, here we go, 3 knights defense. Maybe back into something like an Italian, or in this case, play the 3 knights. So I thought, oh look, let's just push it to 4 knights. Nice and easy. Mrs. Chess Noob now plays an interesting move. Logical thing is to move the bishop, but is Mrs. Chess Noob going to play bishop to c4, you know, Italian variation of the 4 knights, or something else? There we are, Spanish variation, bishop to b5, aggressive move, not a bad move at all. I had a thought, what am I going to do? Am I going to pressure right away? No, let's play just solid. Bishop to c5. This is classical variation. What next for Mrs. Chess Noob? Now, one of the things in this game, and it's often the case, there we go, interesting, d4, is that when playing against beginner players, sometimes you don't necessarily have to play the most accurately. Captures, putting pressure on the knight. Knight obviously has to move, but where? I thought probably she'll move it here. The thing is, you don't necessarily have to play the most accurate moves and play for checkmate. Because winning, of course, is by checkmate, but you can also win by convincing the opponent that they've lost. Because if they resign, you also still win. And so sometimes the appearance of winning, the appearance of losing is enough to win the game. And we'll see how this plays out. So, as I said, I thought Mrs. Chess Noob was probably going to play this knight. There we are. And of course, puts pressure here, but if we trade, they capture back, attack on my knight here. Didn't quite look like the look of that. You know, can potentially just ignore it. Short castles, maybe. Of course, can attack as well. There we go. But I decided to take this way. Free pawn. 2 pawns up now, actually. But you'll notice that, you know, it's actually a pretty equal game. So white still has a really good position, you know, potentially nice attacking pieces, open lines. It is quite good for white. Probably one of the best moves is just to move the king out of danger. Short castling. Yep, and that's what Mrs. Chess Noob does. Now for me here, I thought short castling for me is probably best as well. Super solid. I wasn't necessarily keen on a solid game. I wanted to put in threats, you know, with these 2 pieces. If that moves forward, there's 2 attackers there. That looks pretty good. Didn't want to necessarily move my knight backwards. You know, short castles, very solid, but how can I make an attack? I started looking at this, putting immediate pressure on that light square bishop, that Spanish bishop. And the more I looked at that, the more I liked it. Just calculating what's best. Yep, and that's what I did. A6. And here, I think Mrs. Chess Noob thought that they had some sort of maneuver like this, but of course that doesn't quite work. It's not a diagonal. And then they realize, oh, actually, no, looking at the bishop. There we are. They played the bishop. And that's a bit of a mistake, because I think it's a mistake in counting, because captures, captures, captures. So that doesn't quite work for Mrs. Chessnoob, but maybe they got a little bit flustered by initially thinking the queen. So captures, captures, and captures. And here I end up a piece. Also, queen staring at the g-pawn. Mrs. Chessnoob saw this, captured, trying to deflect the queen. Very good idea. And they take the rook. Now, one of the tactical things here is this is not necessarily good because the knight can't really come back out. And so you've traded an active knight for a rook. Yes, that's good, but the rook wasn't really active. And so here, obviously I could have just captured, but I wanted to open up this diagonal. I wanted to immediately place attacking threats. So as I said, you don't have to play the most accurate moves. Sometimes you can play for activity. This is just a casual game anyway. I thought it would be interesting to see what happens. Mrs. Chessnoob's beginner. They hung that bit. Obviously I could capture back that bishop, but I was happy to let that bishop go potentially. Again, they were going to have to pull that bishop back to save it, and I win a bit of tempo. All right, some food arrived. Some very nice tarama salata. And just to make a bit of room, just going to put some of the chess pieces back into the case just off to the side. Alrighty. So moving that bishop, of course, is logical. But what's Mrs. Chessnoob going to do? This bishop coming back here is potentially good. Knight's escape is blocked, so kind of in jail. The king is moved, so can't castle, but potentially rook. Capturing control of the file, the e file will be good. So tactical ideas. They decide to trade away the bishop, which is interesting. That's okay. You'll see technically white is better here. Of course they are. Gave back a bit of material. I wondered if Mrs. Chessnoob thought that she could move the knight out. You know, sometimes beginner players have difficulties seeing diagonals. It is a weakness. I certainly had that trouble when I was a beginner, and I needed to deliberately look. Yep, yeah, she didn't see it. Captures cap, and there we go. Captures, knight gone. And at this point, I think Mrs. Chessnoob thought that she was potentially close to losing. Now, obviously, you can absolutely play on with white from this position. And here I was just noting to Mrs. Chessnoob, you know, there is a bit of a danger with the knight capturing the rook there because the knight in a corner does effectively get trapped, gets put into jail. Not so easy to evacuate afterwards. I think Mrs. Chessnoob saw this problem here, you know, scary looking. So one of the reasons why I wanted to open up that diagonal and actually, you know, didn't capture straight away. But against these threats, sometimes it's difficult to see the right move. So Mrs. Chessnoob, king to h1. And here I put bishop, long, light square diagonal. And in this position, Mrs. Chessnoob, as she was calculating, convinced herself that checkmate was inevitable. Now, of course, that's not actually the case. Checkmate is not inevitable, but she convinced herself that she had lost and opted to resign. And, you know, in over-the-board games, in real games, as I said, you know, sometimes you can win simply by convincing your opponent that they've lost. Good game. GG, some bread came for our tarama salata, and at this point we decided to have our meal.